It's with some hesitation that I broach the topic of trauma, PTSD, and metaphysics or the spirit world. I say trepidation because the last thing that we need when we're terrified, experiencing physiological flashbacks in pain and, in some of the deepest hells that any human beings have ever experienced. The last thing that we need in a state of overwhelm and poor coping ability is to add ambiguity, confusion, controversial new information, and stuff that may run counter to some of our beliefs. And so in this area, anything in the spirit world or in metaphysics could be distracting, frustrating, completely irrelevant, and in that way destructive. So what I would say in the simplest sense is that if you are in a state of active PTSD in this moment and do not have an easy and comfortable rapport with your own sense of spirit world, then just turn this video off and focus on getting out of hell, because that is an important enough goal and the number one concern in terms of your safety and your survival. And so with that caveat, I'd like to share some of the mullings that I've had myself in this terrain as a possible springboard for your own explorations. So the first thing that I would say is that of the 10,000 languages, of which there remain more than 600 today, they are going extinct at a very rapid rate. I believe every couple of weeks a language becomes extinct. But a language has an inherent thought and value system. Every language that one looks through allows us to see the world in a slightly different way. And it's a little bit like this. As you know, there's an infinite array of colors, and our computers boast the ability to perhaps distinguish between 256 million colors, as if our eyes could tell the difference between most of them. However, what language does is a little bit, you can kind of imagine there's this infinite continuum of color. And let's say that we call this first inch of that continuum yellow, and then the next inch orange. Well, that's if you're using increments of inches. If you're using increments of centimeters, when you say yellow, it's a lighter spectrum of yellow for the first centimeter and a slightly darker spectrum of yellow for the second centimeter. And if you used another increment, let's invent an increment of cinches, which just happens to be somewhere between an inch and a centimeter. If we use the increment of cinches, it's 75% is yellow at the far end of the cinch as an inch, and a little bit beyond a centimeter. And my point is that energy exists on these broad, infinite spectrums, white to black, light to dark yellow. Any continuum can be infinitely divided into increments, and once divided can be blocked, packaged, and measured. Any thought, any concept or paradigm can be infinitely perceived and be broken down into language and words, and a word packages energy in a certain way. So the word yellow has an association that packages color in a spectrum of yellow. But what if there was a word called Brello that was a mixture, like gold? We have gold for that. It's kind of a mixture. But my point is that we have these infinite spectrums of energy. We have a limited spectrum of words. We have a narrow assortment of words, many of which we have not learned the meaning of. They're still too big for our consciousness. But what this means is that because we haven't learned all of the meanings of the words in our language, and because there are not enough words to capture many liminal states, a state between one state and another state. We have the state for depression, and we have very depressed, or whatever. We have the word for example, in English, we have the word for love. In Italy, they have 5 or 6 different ways of saying love. In English, it's just love. I love you a little, I love you like a friend, I love... In Italy, they have different ways where the way you say love immediately communicates something that helps the consciousness distinguish in a way that may be closer to the brain. The brain has has 3 systems of processing love. One is attraction, one is emotional bonding, and attachment, and another is romantic love. And that's just 3. And we do not have 3 languages. We have to say romantic love, attachment love, lust love. It's a very important state. We have very limited words. As a result, we experience a lot of confusion and this big debate over, do I love you or do I not? Because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to say a word that means hundreds of different things in hundreds of different moments to hundreds of different people, because heaven forbid you reduce this vast complexity of relationship down to your little meaning of love, and it doesn't happen to coincide with the other person's little, what they are hoping to hear in that moment, and your actions demonstrate that, and suddenly a nice warm flow, which you might have gotten away with, is now a betrayal, because you said this word, you meant this, they heard this, you didn't do this, they expected that, and now you have betrayed them. This is the power of language. I say this because consciousness and language are interconnected. And as we look at things such as metaphysics, spirit, PTSD, trauma, dissociation, association, belonging, origins, divinity, loneliness, betrayal. If we look at these words in this tapestry that we're dealing with, there are some correlations. Not so much on a paradigm level, like we tend to think, trauma, PTSD, that is a disease, and spiritual experience is, healthy and beautiful. But what if there was a little bit more overlap? What if in the map of meanings and the way that we break things up, we start to see that, for example, reality exists in a duality, that we have on the one hand a body that is correlating with narratives such as survival of the fittest and the animal, growing, or, dominance, or just the basic survival instincts. And we look at the body self as this direction that's kind of moving from slime towards, depending on your paradigm, world domination, God status. I mean, if you look at where the human animal is today in terms of its technology, if we flew back in a helicopter 2,000 years ago with an iPhone and shined some LED lights at a shepherd, what would we be called? We'd be called spirits, we would be called gods, the beings of light, whatever it is. So you could see that one way to look at gods and humans is time travel, because presumably there's ordinary people like you and me in the future, and believe it or not, the latest physics treats time as much as a continuum as space, suggesting that space travel and time travel on a scientific paradigm level are identical. We just, in our state, know how to space travel. We don't know how to time travel. And our space travel is relatively limited, not being able to cohabitate other planets right now. But that's also a function of time. If Elon Musk has his way, in 5 to 20 years, we will be actually traveling in space. But that's that civilization in the future. And even people in 1920, if an Elon Musk rocket showed up in 1920, would that be aliens, or would that be us in the future? So you have these different ways of looking, and we tend to project, we go as far as we can with our language and our paradigm to project science, and then when things happen beyond what our science, in all our arrogance that we kind of imagine is the science, in all our arrogance of what is the science, which is just really our very limited hypothesis and explorations and technology of the moment, which is going up at an exponential rate. Like, both science and technology are on an exponential curve. Well, what that means is that while it's taken us from 1920 to the present day to get to where we are, in 10 years we may double that. In 20 years we may double that. I mean, there's an exponential curve, means that we're growing, and that the speed of our increase of growth is growing as well. So it just kind of keeps going up, so that in time, in the future, it could be that we advance more in one day in the future than we have in an entire century in the present, because that is predictable in an exponential growth curve, that there's going to be a point in the future, perhaps 100 years from now, perhaps 500 years from now, perhaps 50 years from now, where in one day more data, more technology, and more research is generated than the entire humanity has generated in the last century. That's a pretty mind-boggling thing. If that's available in 500 years, might they not have cracked time travel by now? Might we not be visited by ourselves in the future? And wouldn't we have an interest as the future to, let's say, heal the past? In other words, let's say you as a future self, you who is there next week with the ability to time travel, and you see you today with PTSD and sickness and drunk, and you're not sure you're going to make it to the future because you're so sick and unpredictable in the past, because you're suffering so much and don't have the skills in the past to get through it, might you not in the future come back to make it easier in the past? So this is some of the terrain that we're exploring. And what I want to draw attention to is that dissociation with the present. In PTSD, it's typically the past asserting itself in the present. But for the past to assert itself in the present, we have to be dissociated. We're here, like when we're totally associated and present to all our five senses in the present, and we're locked in here, and there's no other reality that exists except the present, here and now. Then we know and we see exactly what is here and now, and we don't see anything in the past or anything in the future, and we're here now. And this is, on the one hand, a very sane state, because there is nothing about the now that disagrees with the now. It is what it is, and it's a very easy script. It's like playing one movie, and you've just got one movie to watch, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. Now, when you have PTSD, what you have is moments where the past movie projects stronger on the movie screen of our consciousness than the present movie. So we're watching, Lord of the Rings, and then it looks great. It's running at around 10,000 lumens, and then at 20,000 lumens, Blade Runner rushes in and plays a scene, and the music goes from 3 on the volume level to 9. And it's like, gosh, this is disorienting. It's dissociating, because I thought, Bilbo was just about to do this, but now, Harrison Ford is chopping. What's going on? Am I crazy? No, you're dissociating because you're re-associating with a past memory, a past moment in time. You could even say you are time traveling in that terrain. So in all of this, when you dissociate with the present and you learn how to do that, that is a particular talent, how to dissociate. You do it if you get drunk, you do it if you take drugs. You're dissociating from your senses in the present in order to live a moment in another time. And this comes very close to what would currently be called magic or cutting-edge science, because we know that in the latest theories of physics that there's a space-time continuum that folds in a certain way that might allow you to travel vast degrees of space and vast degrees of time in seconds rather than even linear time, because space and time is folded in on itself as opposed to a long endless sheet, so that you don't have to travel from this point all the way over here, X light years, but rather this sheet is spiraled in on itself, that this point and this point, if you go linearly, might take forever in this spiral, or you could go laterally, geometrically, and make a connection that could be just an inch away, and you have a little black hole or something connecting them. And so we have the same kind of thing with time, where you could call PTSD a black hole, where it's like there's decades apart, and this little black hole takes you right into terror, It's just an inch away, and it's like, oh gosh, I'm stuck with that again. And yet, we're practicing time travel. We're practicing the art of dissociating from the present and associating with horror. Usually it's horror. We don't usually have PTSD of our most blissful moments, unfortunately. But trauma is overwhelm in a way that this part of the brain says is life and death danger. But what if there was trauma, the same sense, a sense of overwhelm that didn't activate this part of the brain and was bliss, or was a sense of deep peace, of absolutely knowing we're okay because we're going into the future where we are okay, of feeling deeply loved and safe because in a future state we have been able to successfully create so much well-being that we radiate that out with abundance, so that anyone who's entering our world, kind of a little bit like, we had the barbarity of, Charles Dickens, Scrooge and all that. I think we've come a little bit forward in that direction. We're a little bit more kind, we're a little bit less terrified of villainous gods and all of that than we were in Dickens, Little Tim and all that. So might those characters feel a little bit more warm in our world or not? I'm just kind of exploring the terrain. What I do know with certainty for myself is that I could not find a logical way out of fear and terror, out of hate and rage. But I have found what I'd call a resonant way out. What I mean is that when I go deep into meditation, in the trust and openness and request to receive profound states of love, safety, help, and support, that there's something about the desperation and the intensity of trauma that makes the response that I feel to that more real. What I mean by that, like, here's a crystal, and I don't know, any of your histories, but my parents were hippies, so we had crystals lying around. I never felt a thing, nothing. It's like, crystals are cool, crystals are spiritual. They certainly look beautiful. I mean, they're 40 million years old. 40 million years old. So I couldn't relate on any emotional, energetic, level. It's just a mental thing, Science says this, people say this, someone says pink is beautiful. I don't feel anything. It's just words. And it wasn't until I had really deep it was actually really deep chronic fatigue and depression when I was around 23, that there was one or two crystals that I felt this joy when I looked at the rainbows. There wasn't a sense of consciousness, it was just joy. Maybe it was a color medicine kind of thing where looking at all the spectrums of the rainbow activated something that cut through the brain in depression state moves in this direction, and that rainbow colors move in that direction. And so spending time looking at rainbows, which happened to be in the crystals, woke that up. It doesn't matter on some level. I felt joy. The joy was an antidote to depression. I mean, common sense. You're feeling depressed. What's the best medicine? Joy. The challenge is, of course, how to get there. If you felt joy, you wouldn't feel depressed, and then you wouldn't need a medicine. So it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I think anyone would choose joy. and acknowledge its medicinal value. It's how to get there. And I would say that in my recent intense life trauma, the first level of healing was touch. You know, slow massage, laying in bed, you know, just calming myself, talking about things, finding human beings who had some degree of kindness. It's hard to find, unfortunately, in modern life, patient kindness, for me at least, with understanding and people not thinking you're crazy. That's the number one medicine to kind of get out of shame and kind of the insanity type level. Then what was there was profound terror and profound loneliness and profound pain, and terror of being alone in those states. And there again, loving human beings, sex, cuddling, massage, words, eye gazing, holding hands, a tether to something warm and safe and familiar and human. Moving through that stage, which, you know, I would sometimes just cuddle someone for hours and hours, or try and feel loving states, or try and give something, you know, just something that seemed worth living for and beautiful was the next stage. But then came a stage where I started to feel the love and the care of an energy and a feeling and of presences that were amplified around and through crystals. And I'd be so grateful, you know, it's like I'm in agony, I'm in terror, whatever, and I'd pick up this crystal and I'd have a sense of a presence. And it's like human beings are so fucked up and so unsafe, but this presence is safe. It's like I found sanity. You know, this presence is not going to say, why did you do that? Whatever. It's unconditionally understanding. And it was visceral. Meaning, but I don't think it was strong enough that it would have been visceral through the peak of my terror and all that. I needed a human hand or something, even though, you know, human beings are so scattered and, you know, unreliable for that. When you need absolute certainty that I'm loved and I'm safe and no one is ever going to leave me here again, human beings are so pathetic, you know, in that area. It's like, oh, this was on TV. Oh, I've got to do text this. And it's like, you just ruined it. You don't get it. I'm in absolute desperation. Some part of me feels like I'm going to die. Yes, I know that's not logical. I don't want to explain that. I don't want you to look at me as if I'm crazy. I just want you to hold me. No, fucking assholes, you know, they're just useless. So human beings, at least in the average spectrum, I'm not trying to insult the amazing human being you may have been lucky enough to meet that's absolutely there for you, but human beings as a whole, useless. These presences, no. These presences, there. Now, I can't always feel them. It's like this spectrum. But once I get up to the point where I know I'm safe and I can take care of myself, and there's just this ache of why is it so lonely and painful in this world? You know, how do human beings do this to each other? It's just miserable. That's when these presences come in. And what I'm wondering is, like, there's a way that I'm feeling them and that they're real for me. That as I do, you know, research and all that, at the religious states that have been induced in different people, traumatic states have often given birth to things like religions. I mean, you're up on a mountaintop, there's lightning, you're dehydrated, You're all alone, there's this, there's that, there's a storm, you've got your fears and all that, and suddenly a vision comes. Suddenly there's a sense of connection with something more. And we use our limited paradigm to say, okay, this is a God, this is not me, it's not a future self, it's not a higher technology, it's not a this, it's whatever we make it up to be. And then we write it down, what's our vision, whatever, and then this is the most exciting and amazing thing I've ever experienced in my whole life. It's the most exciting thing any of my neighbors have. This is the new truth, this is the new religion. And so there's a way that trauma and the body, initiation rituals in tribes often begin by bringing the body basically into trauma. Like if you watched, what was it? Anyway, there was a wonderful Amazon tribal movie years ago, and you watch the initiation ceremony of the young men, and it's like sleep deprivation, traumatic, stinging ants all over his body, blurring the boundary between present and the past, all this stuff. And then a vision, something coming through when you're dissociated through pain, discomfort, and trauma from this reality, and now jumping to another state. I wanted to bring this in because I'm really enjoying Graham Hancock at the moment. I've just discovered his work through his band TED Talk, which is a nice place to start. And he's got a beautiful, open-minded scientific review of our religious history, of our Paleolithic artistic history, of our ethnobotany and hallucinogenic history as different species, as cultures throughout the world, as artists throughout the world, as visionaries throughout the world, from the past, the present. And because it seems like there is a much higher percentage probability that you as someone with PTSD, that me with someone with PTSD, that you and I as people who have dissociated violently from the present are more statistically predisposed to sacred, transcendent, as well as horrific experiences that are not of the senses. It seems kind and beautiful that we start gently educating ourselves about that terrain. Like throughout the last 50,000 years, when our brains have been identical to the brains we have today, what have people experienced in traumatic states? What's the terrain of probability out there, and why? What's happening chemically? What's happening emotionally? What's the purpose? Can such responses to deep trauma actually be medicinal, healing, doorways towards well-being, towards life purpose? And I think they can. So I want to invite you to begin some of that exploration with me, and hope that it brings more well-being. Thank you.